Hi class, I'm Rachel Woodard and I'm going to be presenting on creativity in the workplace. This was done with my partner Mitchell Stoyan. Now, creativity is difficult to define and difficult to implement in the workplace if you're unsure how to use it. While creativity can increase wanted behaviors such as innovation, it can also involve ambiguity and risk-taking, which are some things that are looked down upon in the workplace, generally speaking. People crave predictability and sameness when that will likely cause a business to stagnate and eventually perish. In following the likes of Google and Pixar, two very successful companies, we can see how creativity can be implemented in the workplace without sacrificing too much in the way of productivity and predictability in an organization. In an article I found, there were 10 tips toward creativity in the workplace, and these are going to illustrate how creative people can be managed, but also how creativity can be implemented in the workplace. So step one was to reward creativity in those who display it. And a lot of people hear the word reward and they think of like participation trophies or giving gold stars. And that can be a little difficult of a hurdle to get over. But research has shown, in my background in behavioral psychology, which is my undergrad degree, that positive reinforcement is the best method to increase wanted behaviors and decrease unwanted behaviors in a person. So praising creative actions may be the best route to take to increase creative behaviors. I mean, just saying, good job, I'm glad you did this, great idea, might be enough to reinforce creative ideas, creative problem solving. Also, just acknowledging somebody who's displaying creativity may be enough to reinforce their creativity in and of itself. So it really depends on the person, what they value, and if they value your input, then that is a great way to increase creativity. Step two is take sensible risks. In managing creativity, an author named Granat calls for, quote, enlightened understanding of creativity, which may be critical for facilitating creatives and non-creatives to work together in producing creative offerings and balancing the level of creativity, radical to incremental, with clients' requirements. So most risk-averse people might find comfort only in incremental creativity, while creative people need the space and the resources to come up with radical creativity as well, which includes taking some sensible risks. As Smith and Paquette put it, quote, the creation process and creativity itself require an open-ended and flexible environment in which experimentation can occur and where being unorthodox and defying the norms are encouraged. And we look at Pixar and Google as really good examples of these things. Now, step three says to overcome obstacles, don't let them overcome you. In one article about business students' perception of creativity, creative traits were largely considered separate from problem solving, but many of the other sources define creativity as being part of problem solving. So it was a part of problem solving. Step four is think for the long term. An article cited for my paper went over creative solutions and managers and how creative managers tend to think for the long-term solutions rather than focusing simply on short-term goals. In this way, these steps may be combined to come up with long-term solutions to obstacles rather than letting the short-term get in the way of creative problem solving. Step five says keep growing. And a really great quote from one of my articles said, quote, avoiding stagnation requires the provision of a dynamic and complex environment in which knowledge can grow and be challenged by new information and circumstances. So in other words, allowing the space and resources for creative thinking allows for continual growth rather than stagnation. Step six says, beware of the dangers of knowing too little and too much. And I really like this in terms of somebody knowing just enough to be dangerous, as they say. And that's the point at which somebody knowing a little about one subject increases their confidence in their knowledge about that subject, despite them only knowing a little bit about the subject. Whereas as your knowledge increases, your confidence in the amount that you know decreases. So it becomes a graph of confidence being high, but information being low. And as you go on, the graph goes down in terms of how much confidence you have in the amount of knowledge that you have. Because being an expert means that you still lack knowledge in areas of that particular subject. So I think that knowing too little and having a lot of confidence in something is not great, but also knowing too much and having no confidence in the amount of knowledge that you have is not good either. So finding a balance between these states can be beneficial in fostering creativity. Step 7 says to tolerate ambiguity, and a great quotation from the film Ratatouille, director Brad Bird had to say this about the creative process. Quote, "If you try to over-control the process, you limit the process." And limitations to some extent foster creativity, but a balance must be found between too many limitations and too much freedom. That can be seen a lot in Hollywood when a director is young and has few resources at their beck and call, so they must be creative in order to solve their problems and produce a film which fits their vision. As directors become more prestigious and sought after, their ability to get the resources they need for a project increases, but limits their creativity by allowing too much freedom to follow their vision. So if you went to say like Jaws, for instance, the shark didn't work. So they were going to have the shark like all over the place, and they were going to show it everywhere. But by not showing the shark as much, it actually creates more suspense and made for a possibly better film than it would have been originally. So that kind of shows how you have to balance between the limitations and freedom in order to foster creativity. Step number 10 tells us know when to shape the environments and when to leave them. So that's a good illustration of knowing when to shape that environment and when to leave it alone and just allow creativity to happen. In step 8, Pixar and Google come to mind as great examples of how to illustrate this point. Reconceptualize unsolvable or intractable problems. In Pixar, quote, "The value lay in creating the environment in which people can do cool things. If we had to set out to solve all of the things we actually did solve, we might have gotten frozen." So Pixar went out to solve these big, big problems, and in doing so, they created an engine that lasted them for years and years when technology was growing at such a fast pace that it could have lasted them only a month or two if they had only solved the smaller problems to begin with. And in Google, quote, to facilitate its desire to succeed and be innovative in software design, Google intentionally attempts to conquer technical problems that are unsolved. Incredibly gifted employees who thrive facing dynamic challenges would rather be faced with an insurmountable challenge. Their fascination to find the solution drives them on rather than only being challenged what they already know. So Google and Pixar are both great examples of how you can illustrate the point of reconceptualizing unsolvable or intractable problems. And finally, step number 9 says, find what you love to do. People are at their most creative when they find what they love to do and are allowed the resources in order to do it. As the saying goes, find what you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. And while this is not necessarily the case, since hard work is part of any career, it does illustrate the point that working in a field you love makes the hard work worth your time and effort. Since many people spend the majority of their lives at work, especially Americans, it is important to find work in which you feel creatively fulfilled, even in the business world. Thanks so much, guys.